All right, this is part 2 of our first series of videos on being a designer for Curriculum 5018. In video 1, we talked a little bit about digital literacy and learning theory that supports visual design. In this video, we're going to cover some basic visual design principles. So just for a quick review, we talked about different learning theories for visual design. So cognitive load was the one we went into more detail because we talked about how if we have irrelevant information or details on something, it makes it harder to learn. We talked about grouping and clustering ideas, accessing prior knowledge, connecting to personal identity, and then creating a positive learning experience. And this is important because remember, design happens through choices. We need to make choices according to those learning theory. And the types of choices we make have to do with the fonts we choose, the size of font, alignment, shape, color, proximity, where we place things, the order we place things, and really just the images we choose to use and such. So let me show you an example of some choices you can make in visual design. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to show some slides that some of the students in the Educational Technology Leadership Program have made. So here's one, trying to highlight some of the different decisions you can make with text. So do you see how you have different fonts, different colors? This is centered aligned and this is left aligned. And they make a difference in how easy it is to read something. So this is an overall pretty simple concept, but if this was a complicated bit of information, the extra fonts, the extra colors, and the center alignment would make it a little bit more complicated and it would increase the cognitive load. So that's just an example. So I'm going to show you some different design principles that help you make choices that will decrease cognitive load and increase the learning experience and effectiveness. So the first is proximity. So proximity has to do with what is next to what. So you see, like, for example, in this Happy National Book Lovers Day, the date is right next to the title. So that helps me in my mind connect the date with what it is. You see in these pictures how there's a picture with text immediately below it. That helps us keep things connected so we don't have to look all over for the information. So the learning principles that go along with proximity are the idea of cognitive load, which we talked about, and also this grouping and clustering ideas. If we can keep things together, ideas together that go together, that actually can support learning. So here's an example from Christine Williford of looking at design principles of proximity. You can see here the triangles look more related. Here, the circles and the triangles, they look different because they're different shapes, but they're also separated, so we associate with them in different ways. Here's some bad designs for proximity. So most of these are that the words that should not be related are put too close together. So it's bad proximity. So you can see this school here is just way too close to that quit. Suicide event. They tried to put like a line under it, I think, to separate it, but it still like does not work so well. And then this one, don't save a life, be afraid to give blood. Again, they tried to differentiate it with color, but because of the placement of the text, it makes it confusing. Here's another example of a good design where the caption is right under the photo. So I don't have to look all over to find the caption. I can see it right here. All right. So that is proximity. The next principle is alignment. Okay, so alignment has to do primarily with text, but you can align your images with your text. So, for example, you see here, this fresh veg, it's right aligned, which creates a straight line down to this left aligned text. Okay, this one we can see that it's all aligned on this one side. And this one has some vertical alignment. This one I think is a little bit confusing, but at least for like a fun type thing, I think it works. I would not use it as much for learning, but it works for what it is. So here's the types of alignments. So left alignment, we have this straight hard line on the left, and right alignment, there's the straight hard line on the right. Okay, so because we read left to right, most of our stuff is in left alignment, because after my eyes get to this line, it goes right back to the beginning of the next line, and that actually makes it easier to read. Whereas here, my eyes have to figure out where the beginning of the next line is every time I go back. That actually increases cognitive load, because my brain has to do things that are not really relevant to the actual content. And so even though it's kind of subconscious, it can actually make things more difficult. So you see in center alignment, where it's aligned in the center here, then you have the uneven edges on both sides. Center alignment is good for differentiating something and giving it attention. However, if I'm going to do a lot of text, I have the same problem with the right, where my eye gets here, I have to find the beginning of the next line. So whenever you have long blocks of text like this, always left align, because that will help reduce cognitive load for your learner. And then justified is when they do an even line on both sides. What happens with justified a lot is you get these weird spaces. Do you see how some of these are really bigger spaces than others? So be really careful with justified text, because that can also add some inconsistency. And anytime there's inconsistency or something weird, it makes our brains work just a little bit harder. So the learning design theory that goes with that is, again, cognitive load. We want to make sure that our brain doesn't have to search for the text, that it makes sense and it's consistent. All right, the next principle is repetition. And that has to do with repeating shapes, colors, fonts, so that things become organized in our brain. And that also goes to cognitive load, because if something repeats, it's less information our brain has to process. It's fewer changes. And it also increases the learner experience, because it's just a pleasant thing. So here's some examples. That repetition, we enhance clarity, it has visual interest, and it can tie elements together. So we want to duplicate patterns or backgrounds, use same shapes, colors, fonts, and similar styles of graphics. So especially when you're creating a website, you want to make sure that you're using the same type of fonts across, because that creates a sense of unity. The next one is contrast. So contrast is mostly about making things really clear. So dark background, light text. You can see the colors and the contrast that make the text pop out in this. And that goes to cognitive load again, because we don't want things to be hard to read, because that adds extra extraneous cognitive load. And it makes it a better experience. So this is from Tracy. You see how sometimes you'll have bright colors like this, and it's almost like there's a vibration, like the green looks a little bit fuzzy because it's contrasting with the orange in the back. Whereas this one is a better contrast, because you don't get that fuzziness or that vibration behind it. Here's some more examples. Again, this one has this vibration. These ones are good and clear. This one's, there's just not enough contrast in it. So basically, if you have a dark background, we want to use light text. It's harder to see if you have a dark background with dark text or a light background with light text. We want to increase contrast and use the opposite of the background. And that's a good rule of thumb. If I have a dark background, I'm going to use a light text. If I have a light background, I'm going to use a dark text. We want to make it as clean, as clear as possible to support learning. Okay, next we have hierarchy. So hierarchy has to do with helping people know what to look at first and what's most important. So for example, this "we're open," it's bigger, it's bold, it draws your eyes. So that's what they want you to look at first. Or when you have different menus, we want to be able to scan and understand the main ideas. And we do that through hierarchy. This comes to cognitive load, grouping ideas, and it can also be part of accessing prior knowledge, because it helps us connect structures in our brain with how things work. So here's some examples. You see here, this has a little bit of hierarchy. It has this bold, but it's not obvious. This one, it's really obvious what the headings are. And so it makes it much more clear and it's easier for our brains to organize it. Here's another example. This, we don't know where to look. It all looks the same. Whereas here, we know what the main idea is and we know what pieces to focus on first. Okay, last one is space. So sometimes when we design stuff, we like to try to fill all the space, but it can be really nice and pleasant and useful to have open space when we design things, especially for learning. It kind of gives you breathing room and it helps the cognitive load again, and it improves the learner experience because it's not so overwhelming and it can be much more pleasant and aesthetically pleasing. So this is an example of active white space where there's intentional space along here on the edge that helps us guide our view down through the slide. You can use white space for organization, readability, and it just makes it feel simpler, feel better. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So when you create things, you have to say, okay, do I need all the elements here? Do I need to change that font or not? Do I need to change that color or not? Always be doing things on purpose. So final checklist, and I'll give this to you, to make sure that when you are designing something for learning, for the text, you're looking at the font, making sure the font's really readable, contrast in colors, the size is right, and then left align blocks of text. Again, it's about making it really clear. Make sure the images are clear in alignment, that the images complement the message. They're not just decoration. Hierarchy, where the user knows where to look first. What goes together appears together, that we have some consistency and white space. So that's kind of the checklist I've made to help you when you're creating a visual design to communicate clearly and to help people learn. So here's our main takeaways from this first set of videos. Practicing visual design. Remember in the first part, practicing visual design develops digital literacy and it helps us support learning. So those are the reasons we're talking about visual design. Design is about making decisions that learning theories can help us determine what the best way to do those decisions are, including cognitive load theory, which lets us know that we need to keep our designs clear and simple to support learning. All right, thanks for watching.